Just a couple of other things about myself that might be salient. This is the second time I've been able to talk to a group here, and I came here once for a week as a patient. A number of years ago, had a horrible heart attack. A clot came from somewhere and cut off the LAD artery in my heart. And of course, I almost died. But thank goodness, some wonderful doctors in Boston helped save my life. And shortly after that, I was diagnosed with follicular lymphoma. And I've had 2 rounds of that now. And one of the side effects of the chemotherapy is I can't feel my feet. And so I have to do this. And then shortly after that went into remission, I got a clot from somewhere else, and it lodged itself right here in my brain. And that stroke killed the portion of my brain where you formulate speech. And just like that, I couldn't speak. And over the last several years, I've been trying to learn how to speak English again, which is a good experience to have had. And those of you who are close here, you'll notice when I'm speaking that I will forget words, or I'll use the words in the wrong way. And if you can figure out what words I'm looking for, just shout it out to me, and it'll be a big help for us. Being an academic is my second career. The first one is I created and ran a company in the Boston area where we make advanced materials. My partners were professors at MIT, but I always had wanted to be a teacher. So as the company hit its stride and I was hitting age 40, with the support of a wonderful wife, decided I would have to do it now or never, and so I bailed out, put the number 2 person in charge of our company, and I became a doctoral student all over again, with 4.5 kids. If you are thinking about doing that yourself, check with me first. But I'm a bit grateful that I did it in that sequence of building a company and then studying the company, because it gave me a set of questions that I probably wouldn't have asked had I just stayed in academia nonstop. And one of the big questions I asked is, why is innovation so hard? And it can't be that managers are not smart. There had to be a deeper cause. And as I studied that problem, stumbled upon a theory that we now call the theory of disruption. And I never had thought about theories as in management before, because the word theory connotes theoretical, which connotes impractical. And I can imagine how scientists use theories every day. But managers, do they use theories? And then I realized, my gosh, absolutely good managers use theories. Because a theory is a statement of causality. It's a statement of what causes what and why. And when you think of it in those terms, every time you as managers take an action, it's predicated upon a theory in your mind, that if you do this, you'll get the result. And every time you develop a plan and put it into place, it's predicated upon one or more theories or statements of causality, that if we do this, we'll be successful. And most of us just don't even think about the theories that we use. And so that's what I've been trying to think through. Are there statements of causality which, if we follow them explicitly, would help us be better as managers and better as innovators? So I want to go through just a couple of theories that are as a foundation. And then I'd like to just sit down and think through with you a set of theories that aren't yet well developed, but which might merit some of our attention. So what I'd like to first describe is the theory of disruption and why that's important. So you notice there that I've organized this around 3 concentric circles. And what they're meant to represent is populations of people. So people in this innermost circle represent customers who have the most money and the most access. And then as you go to the larger circles, they represent larger populations of people who have progressively less money and less skill. Almost always, sophisticated companies begin in the center because the first products are complicated and expensive. And you have to have rich customers in order to play in the game. The way the technology deploys itself in the industry is as follows. You can put on the vertical axis of this analysis the performance of a product or a service over time. There's a trajectory of improvement in every market which measures the ability of customers to use improvement. You never think about this. But what it says is we actually cannot utilize all of the innovation that is thrown at us. There's our ability to use it. And then there's a different trajectory of improvement that innovating companies provide as they make better and better products. And the most important observation about this is that trajectory of technological progress almost always outstrips the ability of customers to use the progress. And so if you go back on the left-hand side, in the mid-1980s, when we were first learning how to do word processing on those early personal computers, about every 30 seconds, you had to stop your fingers to let the Intel 286 chip catch up to you. Mm-hmm. Because the world's fastest microprocessor wouldn't even keep pace with our fingers. The technology was very rudimentary. But as Intel has introduced faster and faster chips, now on the right-hand side of the diagram, these processors are so fast that we can only utilize about 15% of their capacity. Intel is faster than we can utilize improvement. Now, some of the innovations that help innovating companies make better and better products are incremental innovations that we see every year. Others are quite dramatic breakthrough improvements, but their purpose is the same in that what those kinds of innovations are capable or focusing on are what we call sustaining innovations. Their purpose is to make good products better. And what we found is that the established leaders in any market almost always win the battles of sustaining innovations when there's a battle in the marketplace. My sense in healthcare is that almost all of our innovation are sustaining innovations in character. We're focused on making good products better. But there's a couple of other types of innovation that make a difference. The second type we call disruptive innovations. And disruptive innovations are not better innovations, but rather we chose the word disruptive because rather than making good products better, disruptive innovations transform the products in the center into innovations that are so much more affordable and accessible that many more people have access to and can use this innovation. And so that's the way we define disruptive innovation, is they make products to become more affordable and accessible, whereas sustaining innovations make good products better. What we found is the incumbents Many of you are incumbents to the healthcare industry. I'm an incumbent in higher education. What we found is that almost always the incumbents like you and I get killed when somebody comes into the market with something that's affordable and accessible. Now I'd like to talk about why the odds are so different. When we moved to Boston in the late 1970s to finish graduate school, there was a company in the world called Digital Equipment Corporation. And those of you with a bit of gray hair will remember this company. It was just, everybody believed that it was the best run company in the world. And they had gone from nearly zero to $16 billion in just a few years. When you then read explanations about why digital equipment was so successful, inevitably it was attributed to the brilliance of the management team. Then about 1988, digital equipment fell off the cliff. And when you then read explanations about why digital had stumbled so badly, always it was attributed to the ineptitude of the management team. Same folks running the same company. But for a while, I framed the question in that way as well. What is it that caused a good set of managers to get so stupid so fast? But then we realized there wasn't stupidity involved in any dimension of that decision. Digital equipment made a computer that we called a mini computer. They sold for about $250,000. They were about as big as this podium. And they had to sell it direct from the customer to the client. And the selling process involved a lot of training, support, service, and software. And people just had to have costs like that in the business to play in the game. And in order to make money to support that cost structure, they had to sell their products to generate gross margins of 45%. And that's how they made money. There were 9 companies that made the same type of product. It wasn't just digital, but Data General, Prime, Wang, Nixdorf, Hewlett Packard, Honeywell, and every one of them collapsed in unison. And there just had to be something fundamental that happened. So if you look at what was happening in the 1980s in that environment, people were coming into senior management all of the time with proposals to invest in better products. If you looked at some of them, they went to the very high end of the sustaining innovation trajectory, making computers that could take on IBM. If you looked at the business plans, they could generate gross margins of 60%, not 45%, and you can sell them for $500,000. At the same time, the management is trying to decide if they should invest in those products. Other people were coming in saying, wait a minute, look outside, everybody's making personal computers. Can't you see it? And they go to the window and see outside, and in fact, in the 1980s, everybody was buying personal computers. But when they looked more carefully, they could see a couple of other troubling things. The first one is, do you remember how crummy those early personal computers were? In fact, Apple sold the Apple II as a toy to children. Not a single one of Digital's customers could even use a personal computer for the first 10 years that they were in the market. And when they looked at the business models, they looked a lot worse, because in the best of years, they could sell it for $2,000 and generate only 40 to 20% gross margins. And so the management had to make a decision. Should we invest to make better products that we could sell for better profits to our best customers? On the other hand, maybe we should make worse products that none of our customers would buy, that would ruin our margins. What do you think we ought to do? And that's the problem of the innovator's dilemma. is it's very hard for the incumbent to do something that doesn't make sense for the incumbent. And of course, after the personal computer, we have smartphones, and none of the people who make personal computers are making smartphones because it doesn't make sense to the incumbents of the leader. I want to go ahead here. This is a great slide. If you go back in history, any industry where we have products that today are better in quality and lower in cost, without exception, came from disruption. I'll just read this again. Disruptive innovation transforms products and services that are so complicated and expensive that only the skilled and the wealthy could own and use them, into products that are so affordable and accessible that many, many more people can own and use them. The role of disruption is to create higher quality, lower cost, and accessibility. It's happened in every industry that we can think of. It's followed that process. Disruption is critical. So for a number of years, I was on the board of directors of a big hospital in Boston called the Brigham and Women's Hospital. And in one conversation in half jest, I said, I wonder, how could our hospital become affordable and accessible, higher in quality and lower in cost? How could this ever happen? And the best insight that we could get is, I think the only solution is we need to pray and ask God for a miracle. Because there was no other plausible pathway to make it affordable and accessible. But as we have subsequently tried to understand this theory of disruption, it has become clearer and clearer. And what that entails is, rather than trying to address everything that we use now for in a hospital, we need to bring technology that allows us to do in a clinic the simplest of the things that today we have to address in a hospital. And then we have to keep driving technology into that clinic so that year by year they can do progressively more sophisticated things. And then we need to bring technology to doctors' offices so that you can do there in that clinic or in that office the simplest of the things that today we have to address in a clinic. And then we have to keep driving technology into that office so that we could do more and more sophisticated things. And then we need to bring technology so that in retail clinics, like Minute Clinic, you can do there the simplest of the things that historically we have had to go to see the doctor in her office. And then keep driving technology into that retail clinic so they can do ever more sophisticated things. And ultimately, we need technology so that the patients' families can provide care in their homes. And in a similar way, rather than hoping that the specialists who practice their craft in our hospital, we could pray that they will take pay cuts. Rather than that, we need to bring technology and drive it into the practices of personal physicians so that they can do the simplest of the things that today they felt obligated to refer to the specialist. And then we need to drive technology into those physicians so that they can do ever more sophisticated things in their practice. And then we need technology so that nurse practitioners and pharmacists can do the simplest of the things that today we feel we need to address by a doctor. And then again, keep using that technology to help those practitioners do more sophisticated things. And in a similar way, you use videos so that families can provide more and more of the care. So I have been addressing or puzzling over this question for over 25 years now. And I actually believe deeply the conclusion here that the only way that healthcare can become affordable and accessible, higher in quality and lower in cost, is if we disrupt it. Making the technology lower quality venues, use technology so that lower cost venues of care and lower cost caregivers can do more sophisticated things. It is the only way that we can solve the problem of healthcare. Now, I came to a very interesting discussion last night in the Civic Center, and the question being asked was, is there any hope for healthcare? And it was a very interesting discussion, those of you who were there. One of the things that I observed there is that everybody that I knew of was trying to address the problem by trying to make hospitals higher in quality and higher in cost. And it always is complicated and expensive to change those things into things that are affordable and accessible. And the reason why our panelists just bewailed the cost and how difficult it is to change our institutions, we haven't yet taught them that the way you have to do this is you need to create the new institutions, not simply change the old. In other words, the way we make this happen is not by changing the general hospital to become cheap, but create clinics and doctors' offices and retail clinics and nurse practitioners and personal care physicians. Because when you're creating new things, it is infinitely easier than if you're trying to change the old things. And that's an observation that hit me there, that I think it merits thought. And that is maybe the reason why it's been so hard to bring the changes that we need in healthcare, is that the incumbents, rightly, are focusing on the wrong thing. And if we focus on building the new, the old will ultimately go away. But that's a first observation that I'd like to offer. The next thing I wanted to offer is that I don't think we in healthcare focus nearly enough of our energy to understand business models and changing the business models. And in our work, we've asserted that there are 4 elements of a business model. The first is a value proposition. It is a value proposition that a product or a service that helps customers do more effectively, conveniently, and affordably a job that they are trying to get done. And every business model has to have a value proposition. Then, in order to deliver the value proposition, you have to put a set of resources in place. And resources are things that can be bought and sold, fired. They go home at night, some of them. They can be built and destroyed. They include people and technology, products, facilities, equipment, brands, and so on. And as we put those resources together to deliver the value proposition, processes emerge. And processes are ways of working together that evolve over time, that define how we put the resources together to deliver the value proposition. And as we follow these processes, and some of these are administrative processes, but many of the most important processes are how we put together the people and the technology to deliver care. And as we do that, step by step, a profit formula emerges. And a profit formula defines how you have to put the things together so that you can make money. And that profit formula then determines the value propositions that you can and cannot deliver. And these are interdependently linked in a business model, which is why a business model is so hard to change. One of the things that I've observed as I've studied healthcare, and it merits a lot more study, is most of the healthcare business models out there don't think about processes at all. But rather what they focus on is we have resources, we have equipment, we have people, we have IT management systems, and we deliver these resources together to deliver the value proposition, but they don't think about processes. And as I was listening to the people last night, I realized that there are a few companies that provide very high quality care at low cost. They include Intermountain, where I serve on the board, and they have a person there whose name is Brent James. And this guy just spent his life studying processes and implementing technology, those processes, and the quality and the cost are going in the right direction, not the wrong one. But that's exactly how Kaiser Permanente, Geisinger, the Cleveland Clinic, and most importantly, the Mayo Clinic, their focus is on processes. And there are a lot of people who can get resources, but only a few processes. And I think this merits a lot more discussion. Because if you don't have processes as your focus, then if you ask yourself, how do we improve our organization? You actually can't improve an organization unless you have processes that can be improved. If you don't have process, then all you can do is hire better people than your competitors, or fire more people than your competitors. Because processes are really crude, not very well implemented ways of improving our system. So I'd like you just to think about that, if you could, as you go home. Why is it that we focus so much on our resources and we don't instead focus so much on processes? Because resources are not a business model. Resources are a set of requirements for a business model, but the business model really is in the two bottom slides, our processes and the profit formula. I'm thinking again out loud with you guys about things that I have never thought about before, and a couple of others I want to share, and then I'll take my spot here so that Elizabeth can fire cannonballs against me.
Yeah.
There's a company that I am learning to understand a lot better than I do right now, called Iora Health. And they have an interesting process in the company, and that is they have coaches. And these coaches, their job is to watch what their patients do in their lives, to be sure that they're not doing things that are negative to their health. And if they're doing things that cause problems with their health, these coaches have as an assignment to crawl inside of their patients' lives and help them change so that in fact they don't smoke and so that they do exercise and so on. And rather than hoping that the patients will do these things, they actually have people so that every client or every patient has somebody whose job it is to help them. This last summer, I was invited to go to Salt Lake City to speak at the commencement exercises for a university located there called Western Governors University. It's an online university created 20 years ago by 19 governors of Western states. And so this is quite an important event at the 20th anniversary of their founding, all online. These were interesting people who received their diplomas that day. The average age was 39 years old. 70% of them were females. 70% of them had children. 70% of them worked full or part-time while they were trying to get their degrees. And every time a graduating woman would come across the stage, there was a very interesting story in her face. And many of these stories were sad stories, things that had happened to them that made it very hard for them originally to be successful in school. But they want a better job. They want to build a home. They want to have a family. And they couldn't do it because they didn't have the education required to get a better job or buy a better home. And how did Western Governors, and they have 85,000 students in about 28 different countries. How did they become so successful? They do it the very same way that IORA does, in that they have a coach for every student. And if that student gets in trouble, start to do things they shouldn't be doing or couldn't do them, or other people were creating trouble in their lives, you had a coach there who helped them work their way through their problems. And for a while, I've thought, as I've studied these two universities or institutions, isn't it costly to have a coach who has a personal responsibility for every patient or every student so that they will graduate and get the credentials that they need? And I've concluded, as I've studied them, that having these coaches is dirt cheap. Because what's expensive is if your patients don't graduate from bad behavior to good behavior, or students who couldn't graduate from high school because there was too much complexity in their lives. You make money when they are successful and get jobs, and so on. And I'd like you to just invite you to think about this. Are we minimizing this investment because we think this is expensive? In reality, I think, as we bewail the cost of, or the costs of obesity and tobacco and so on, we're maximizing the wrong idea. I think I'm done. Is that okay?
That's great. That's great.